Trinidad and Tobago is a small nation, but we are not insignificant. We are friends of all, but satellites of none. My name is Analisa Low. I served as the ambassador of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago to the People's Republic of China, with concurrent accreditation to the Republic of Korea, the Philippines, Thailand, Malaysia, Cambodia, Vietnam, and Brunei. It really was a tremendous privilege and honor to serve the interests of 1.4 million people in the Caribbean, in a country of over 1.4 billion people. Our country, Trinidad and Tobago, is located on the southernmost chain of Caribbean islands, located in the Caribbean Sea. We are a country that is known for having a mature hydrocarbon province. The majority of our GDP comes from oil and gas, and we are also diversifying our economy by looking at high value and light manufacturing. We have a bustling and booming tourism industry as well, and we are known for having rich tourism resources. So I hope that many of our Chinese friends could come to Trinidad and Tobago to experience the warmth of the Caribbean islands. Come and experience the greatest show on earth, which is known as our world-famous carnival, where you can dress up in our brightly colored, locally crafted carnival costumes and sing and dance with us for 2 days in the street. You can hear our indigenous music, such as our soca, calypso, chutney soca, that fuels the very pulse of our nation. You can experience our steel pan, which is the first percussion musical instrument that was created in the 19th century. And it really symbolizes the strength, resilience, creativity, and innovation of our people. I think that my multi-ethnic heritage profoundly influenced my outlook and my view of China. My paternal grandparents would have left to Zhongshan in Guangdong province in the late 1940s, early 1950s to find new opportunities and to build a new life in Trinidad and Tobago. And like most Chinese migrants who went overseas to build a new life and to find new opportunities, they brought with them a fierce entrepreneurial spirit and traditional Chinese values and customs such as sacrificing self for the betterment of the next generation. They taught us the value of hard work and the importance of family and giving back to community. And I think that having been brought up in a Chinese household and been raised with Chinese customs and values as well, I have never seen China as foreign. I've never seen China as distant or the other, but I have this profound respect and deep admiration and appreciation for China's development pathways and China's modernization plan. And many of the values that I have been brought up with, I see it here today in China's contemporary society. And I see that as being the backbone of Chinese values as well. And I have a deeper understanding of what drives China's economic trajectory as well. So I think that having that lens, having that multicultural lens, and being of, partly Chinese and Indian descent and having this Caribbean identity as well, I think that has also profoundly influenced my outlook and how I view China. Not many people know about the deeper political and cultural connections that exist between Trinidad and Tobago and China. For example, our relationship is one that preceded the official establishment of diplomatic relations in 1974. The first group of Chinese migrants actually arrived in Trinidad and Tobago from China in 1806 from Canton, or in southern China. It was the first organized settlement of Chinese migration coming to our shores. And from since then, we have had many different waves of migrants and many different exchanges of values, ideas, and culture as well. It was during 1974 when we first became a republic. Our first prime minister, Dr. Eric Williams, traveled to China. It was the first visit by a Caribbean head of state that was paid to China at that time. And he met Chairman Mao Zedong and Premier Zhou Enlai, and he decided to establish and formalize official diplomatic relations with China. And it was through his strategic leadership and visionary foresight that he sought to concretize pragmatic cooperation. And relinkages with China as we continue to design and craft our way as a newly formed republic. And apart from the historical ties as well, China has a very strong footprint and connection to Trinidad and Tobago. The very emblems, our insignia of nationhood, such as our national flag, our coat of arms, were actually designed by a Trinidadian of Chinese descent, Mr. Carlisle Chang, who designed our national emblems in 1962. There was also John Lelam, who was a Chinese who emigrated to Trinidad and Tobago, and he invested heavily in the petroleum sector, and that became the economic backbone of Trinidad and Tobago, and being the oil and gas country, the oil and gas producer that we know today. Now, apart from that, it would be remiss of me not to mention the reciprocal connections and the reciprocal contributions of many of our people from Trinidad and Tobago to China. For example, Dai Alian. Many people may know, but she is considered the mother of Chinese modern dance. She is the co-founder of the Beijing Dance Academy and the principal of the National Ballet of China. She was born and raised in Trinidad and Tobago, and she was from a Cantonese family as well. There's also Eugene Chen. He was born and raised in my hometown, San Fernando, and he was the first foreign minister of China and also the legal advisor of the revolutionary statesman Sun Yat-sen. He also created some of the first Chinese newspapers in the English language that spoke out against the British imperialist interests at the time. So there are many, many different close cultural and political connections between China and Trinidad and Tobago that form the formidable foundation of our relationship that gives way for deeper cooperation and many, many years of stable and reliable friendship. I see a lot of opportunities between Trinidad and Tobago and China, and of course the wider Caribbean and their cooperation with China. China right now is leading the charge on this new wave of technological innovation. It's a new technological revolution. And the Caribbean region can learn a lot from China in terms of how we can use technology in some of our key strategic sectors. How do we integrate? How do we inject new forms of innovation and technology into our agricultural sector, into tourism, into our public healthcare system, into our public sector, where we optimize our functionality and optimize our operations for meeting the needs of our people? So we have a lot to learn from China in terms of how do we transform our economy, transform our society. Many of us in the Caribbean region, we are trying to achieve digital transformation. And we know that we can work with China, who has always been a stable and reliable partner. Apart from that, I know that there are many different challenges, such as geopolitics. Sometimes when different countries, they get a little too close to China, there may be different tensions and pressures from other international partners as well. But sometimes, smaller countries, they do get caught up in that noise. And it's important to recognize that for small nations, we need to speak confidently and share that our foreign policy is made in Port of Spain, not necessarily in London or Washington or Beijing. And it's important to speak on the national interests of your country and to work with all of our international partners who meet the interests of our people. I see the Belt and Road Initiative as being one of the most transformative platforms that could be used towards achieving tangible outcomes and benefits for many nations, particularly small island developing countries, smaller nations, and the global south in general. It was in 2018 when our former Prime Minister, the Honorable Keith Rowley, came to China, and he would have paid an official visit to China then, where our country became the first English-speaking Caribbean country and the first in CARICOM to sign on to the Belt and Road Initiative. And it's through the BRI we would have worked with our Chinese friends to develop critical infrastructure, roadways, airports, public health institutions like hospitals, and new commercial spaces such as industrial parks that allowed our country to undertake and undergo meaningful economic diversification that also allowed us to lessen our dependency on our oil and gas reserves. So the BRI really provided that opportunity for us to realize our vision of making Trinidad and Tobago the gateway for doing business for China, between North and South America as well. The Caribbean region now houses the flagship Belt and Road Initiative project called the Phoenix Park Industrial Estate, and it is the first environmentally friendly 5G connected intelligent industrial park that is meant to catalyze the growth of Trinidad and Tobago's non-energy manufacturing sectors such as light and high-value manufacturing, logistics, warehousing, distribution, and emerging technologies as well. And I've had the pleasure of working with a number of Chinese companies, all in the eastern parts of China, hosting many different business delegations, who would have expressed an interest in expanding their manufacturing operations and expanding their factories into Trinidad and Tobago so that they could now export into North America. The Chinese factories that set up their operations in Trinidad and Tobago have access to over 997 million consumers across Latin America. And Trinidad and Tobago is one of the most ideal investment destinations for Chinese manufacturers who would like to have a greater footprint in the Americas and who would like to expand their business operations there. So the BRI really provides this opportunity for there to be tangible outcomes, and it provides a platform for there to be great economic cooperation, and it's a true illustration of South-South cooperation. With China, no matter the size, the scale, the size of your market, China has always shown a willingness to work with smaller nations, especially in relation to helping our interests be met for our people and helping along and facilitating our development trajectory. So the BRI has been a very, very positive cooperation mechanism for the people in Trinidad and Tobago. I do know that there is a lot of debate around the generalized conceptualization of the term Global South nations, given that we are separated and differentiated by many different factors, such as differences in our historical legacies, our cultural diversity, differences in our ethnic composition, religious and political philosophies as well. There are differences in our size, scale, market, resources. But I think that there is one overarching framework and one vision that really unifies the Global South group of nations, and that is to achieve common and equitable development for all of our people. I think that the Global South is really operating quite differently from generations past. You're seeing, many different changes in technological capabilities, economic capacity, with the increase in sovereign wealth funds and new development banks that provide alternative financing solutions as compared to northern financial institutions. I think that this combination is really giving way to unprecedented political assertiveness amongst the Global South group of nations. Here you are seeing Global South nations exert their autonomy. They are banding together, ensuring that there is more regional integration, regional cooperation across many different institutions and organizations, such as CARICOM, CELAC, the African Union, ASEAN as well. So you're seeing many different types of cooperation, many different types of pragmatic partnerships that are happening across borders and sectors in relation to how the Global South nations operate. For example, recently at the APEC summit, we saw Brazilian President Lula, who would have had bilateral discussions with the ASEAN representatives. We saw South African President Cyril Ramaphosa as well. Also, non-ASEAN nation, of course, having discussions with different representatives as well. So we are seeing many different types of cooperation, many different levels of diplomatic dialogue happening, because the Global South nations have so many different and pressing challenges and complex challenges at that. And we have to find innovative solutions at finding ways of dealing with these challenges. There is so much geopolitical noise and geopolitical tensions that really outline the parameters in which Global South nations operate. But I don't think that these tensions really dictate the behavior of Global South nations, given that they are now becoming even more assertive in terms of finding different solutions and crafting different types of partnerships So it is a very different season, it's a very different time, and it's a very different political order, I would say, that it's being crafted. The future is in the global south. You know, the global south houses over 70% of the wind and solar resources. Over 80% of the middle class is going to reside in the global south by 2030. The global south nations also have over 50% of the world's critical minerals as well. With an aging northern population and a youthful global south population, you are seeing that the productive forces are changing and the systems are being realigned. So there's a lot of movement happening with the global south nations, and there's a lot of investment happening from China as well, going into Latin America and the Caribbean region. I think that now is a time for us to keep a keen eye on global south nations as we continue to work towards building up the type of common and equitable development that we need for our people. Caribbean nations and through our regional organization known as CARICOM, the Caribbean Community, we really see that there is strength in our diversity. We see strength in our togetherness, and we are stronger together. As small island developing countries where we face significant vulnerabilities and different challenges given our small size, our limitations in resources, capital, expertise, human capital, we know that we are very vulnerable and we have to work together in order to have our respective national and regional positions vocalized and verbalized on the international stage. And through the framework of CARICOM, many of our Caribbean countries, our Caribbean member states, we work together to have more mobility between our countries in terms of movement of skills, labor, people. We try to have more air linkages as well and to foster stronger trade and investment and different partnerships across borders and sectors. For example, in the last couple of years, Trinidad and Tobago was leading the charge towards having a stronger energy resilience in the region. Guyana was pushing forward in terms of having more food security and agricultural resilience and agricultural cooperation amongst many of our Caribbean countries as well. I know that Prime Minister Mia Mottley in Barbados was also pushing for more financial independence and more climate financing for the majority of the Caribbean countries who face unique vulnerabilities in terms of our disaster preparedness and, of course, our effects that we feel from climate change. So we do operate in tandem with each other, and we strive to meet the needs of our people by ensuring that working together is within our interest as Caribbean nations. In reflecting on my political philosophy, which I tend to draw from some of the great political thinkers and the politicians in the Caribbean region, it's through that lens that I've adopted the view that smaller nations should always strive to have their foreign policy that is premised on omnidirectional engagement. If we think back at the famous words of the late Prime Minister of Barbados, Errol Barrow, who once said, that we are friends of all but satellites of none. And in the words of former Prime Minister Dr. the Honorable Keith Rowley, who also said, Trinidad and Tobago is a small nation, but we are not insignificant. And I think that it's critically important for smaller countries, smaller nations, and of course, under the wider umbrella of the Global South nations as well, to always strive to have omnidirectional engagements. And that is working with different partners according to the interests and according to the issues that matter most to you and for your people as well. So during my time as ambassador, we would have worked with China towards building up critical infrastructure such as hospitals, roadways, airports, and new commercial spaces such as our industrial parks, which allowed us to foster meaningful economic diversification. We have worked with the United States of America on education and security cooperation. We've worked with India on public health cooperation, pharmaceutical cooperation as well. We've worked with Africa on agro-processing and energy cooperation with Ghana. We've worked with our CARICOM brothers and sisters towards fostering more stronger mobility of people, skills, and resources within the region. So it's important for smaller nations to continue to work with our international partners and to have an approach of non-alignment, because diplomacy is not a luxury, it's an existential necessity. And for smaller nations where we have certain vulnerabilities and we face different complex challenges, it's important for us to remember that we ought to work with many, many different partners. Local politics, domestic politics can have widespread repercussions, and that can change the international order as well. So it's important for us to not be aligned to any one power and to continue to build bridges and formidable friendships with all of our allies and international partners.